Hello, this is the fourth talk looking at the history of the Mongol invasions into the Near East. In the last talk, we brought the events of this era up to the year 1260, at which time the Mongol Empire in the Near East was at its greatest geographic extent, its territories encompassing much of the region, partly ruled by the Mongols themselves, partly client states who had accepted Mongol hegemony. And the Mongol territories by this time included territories as far west as the cities of Aleppo and Damascus. Well, at the end of the last talk, I also mentioned the defiance of the Mamluk Empire, whose rulers refused to submit to the Mongol Empire and killed the Mongol emissaries when they arrived at their court. And it's this I want to pick up on to begin this present talk. Because the Mamluks, having defied the Mongols, then raised their army and advanced eastwards across the Sinai Desert and then towards Mongol-ruled Syria. Now, this is a very striking move. In the past, empires, sultanates and societies had defended their borders, or tried to, against the Mongols. Some had submitted via diplomacy. But hardly anyone marched out beyond their borders to give battle to the Mongols, and we'll see why that's important now. Because when the Mongols invaded Syria in 1260, their army was around 100,000 strong, an enormous force, vastly in excess of the Mamluks' army, which probably wouldn't have been much larger than about 15,000 troops. But crucially, the vast majority of the Mongol army withdrew to the east, to the Caucasus region. Perhaps for the grazing, perhaps also so that it would be nearer to Mongolia on hearing news of the death of the great Khan, and so Hulagu, the commander of the Mongol army in the Near East, would have wanted to be in closer proximity to events taking place in Mongolia so that he could have his voice over the question of the succession. But the crucial point is the majority of the Mongol army withdrew from Syria, leaving only a garrison in the region. It seems very likely the Mongols didn't expect anyone to try and contest their authority, because it wasn't usual for powers to actually invade Mongol territory, whether it was newly conquered or not. So, the Mamluks advanced across the Sinai Desert and then began to move towards Damascus. Now, en route, they conducted negotiations with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which is the only other power that has remained independent up to this point of Mongol control. And the Kingdom of Jerusalem up to this point has tried to play a talking game with the Mongols, neither submitting but keeping diplomatic channels open with the Mongol Empire, trying to see how events would unfold. And it seems likely the Mamluks asked for some kind of assistance from the Kingdom of Jerusalem, quite possibly provisions, possibly horses. It's also possible they asked for military aid, although that's not entirely clear. But the Kingdom of Jerusalem, it seems to have provided some support for the Mamluks, but it didn't supply military support. And my instinct on that has always been that the Kingdom of Jerusalem was trying to keep both options open, not wanting to anger the Mongols, but also wanting to show some support for the Mamluks just in case they won. And the Mamluks did win. Crucially, at the Battle of Ayn Jalut, the Mamluks encountered the Mongol garrison, which they then successfully defeated. And the reason for this defeat lie in the cut and thrust of the actual battle, a crucial moment occurring when an Ayyubid force, or a force from the previous Ayyubid Empire, which had been overthrown by the Mongols, changed sides during the battle. After this, the Mamluks were then free to conquer much of Syria, and certainly cities like Damascus and Aleppo, which had formerly been part of the Ayyubid Empire and very much opposed to the Mamluks, they were entirely prepared to accept Mamluk control because they preferred it to the prospect of Mongol overthrow. And so these events transform the geopolitics of the region, where in the early months of 1260 the Mongols were advancing in this area, meeting very little resistance. By the end of the year in 1260, the Mamluk Empire expanded to control much of the former Ayyubid Empire, which had been overthrown by the Mongols, right up to the river Euphrates. So a real change in fortunes takes place. But this naturally sets up a really important question. When will the Mongols return? Because of course the vast majority of the Mongol force remained unfought. Hulagu, with probably around 80,000 troops, was not that far away in the Caucasus, and certainly as soon as he learnt what had happened of the defeat at Ayn Jalut, at the Mamluk's conquest of Syria, formerly Mongol territories, and the Mongols were not accustomed to losing territory, he swore revenge. But here's the important point. It took 20 years for the Mongols to stage a significant counterstrike against the Mamluks. They sent some small armies of a few thousand troops to raid the area, or sort of expeditionary forces, but there was no return in force for 20 years, and that is absolutely crucial. It's crucial for the Mamluk Empire because it gave the Mamluks a chance to build up their position in Syria, to build up their position economically, to strengthen their army, to fortify their frontiers. They also used much of this period to stage campaigns against the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Principality of Antioch. They overthrew the Principality of Antioch in 1268, but by around 1270 the Kingdom of Jerusalem was much reduced, which of course all played in to the Mamluks' growing empire and growing revenue streams and growing authority across the region. But it does raise the question of why the Mongols took so long to return in force. And just as an aside here, there was another Mongol invasion that was in preparation in this same time period. And this was the Mongol invasion of Western Christendom. Now, some background to this. In 1241, Mongol armies had invaded Hungary and Poland, having conquered much of Western Eurasia, and they defeated every army sent against them. Now, in 1259-1260, it seems that the Mongols were preparing for their next overwhelming invasion into Western Christendom, and commentators from this era seem to have felt that there wasn't much that could really be done to resist them. So, we have a situation towards the end of the year in 1260 with Hulagu swearing revenge against the Mamluks following his defeat at Ayn Jalut, and then further north, other Mongol commanders planning the invasion of Western Christendom. But neither of those things actually happened. Now, to explain this, the Mongol Empire by this stage was controlled in its various different regions by different Mongol dynasties, generally the descendants of Chinggis Khan's various different sons. And so the area to the north of the Black Sea was ruled by the Jochid dynasty, their current ruler being Berke. And then you have Hulagu in the Near East. Now, the Jochid dynasty to the north felt that the Near East fell within their ulu, their area of authority. And so when Hulagu began his invasions into the Near East, they were very concerned that he might try and deny them their rights as the region's overlords. And Hulagu did deny them those rights, and it became very clear very quickly that Hulagu was intent on making the Near East his own empire. Now, for Berke, this was unthinkable. And so as the 1260s developed, quarrelling turned into conflict as Berke's territories, which became known as the Golden Horde to later historians, and Hulagu's territories, which became known as the Ilkhanate, went to war with each other. And so really it's from this time that these two major wars of conquest against the Mamluks in Egypt or against Western Christendom, neither actually takes place, because the Mongol armies turn against each other and begin to wage a ruinous, from their perspective, civil war. And so large chunks of their armies have to be sent to the Caucasus to watch the frontier against their Mongol rivals, with only smaller forces being sent to conduct any wars of expansion. Other factors that prevented the Mongols from staging a new major invasion against the Mamluks were the rise of various rebellions across Mongol territory in the Near East. The Battle of Ayn Jalut, a Mamluk victory, and therefore a very conspicuous Mongol defeat, seems to have encouraged other people elsewhere to rise in rebellion against the Mongols. And the Mongols, although they might have enormous armies, they were still a very small ruling elite over a very wide region, so their control in various different districts was actually quite slim. So there was the prospect of rebellion, and so in the early 1260s the Mongols were frequently engaged in putting down rebellions across their territory, all of which then gave the Mamluks an opportunity to build up their strength in Syria and Egypt, seeking trading agreements with other powers, building up their economic position, building up their army, destroying much of the Crusader states, which again helped them to build up their empire, all to fortify their frontier against the Mongol counterstrike they knew would happen, but which didn't happen in 20 years. And it's that counterstrike we will pick up in the next talk.